Hi everyone, this is Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here with a very well-known person in cybersecurity. It's Jorge Orchilles, who is the CTO at Scythe, and also a very popular SANS instructor and an author and a fellow at ISSA, and just a real icon in our industry. George, thanks for spending some time chatting today.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. And hello, everyone that's out there listening. Appreciate your time.
Hey, we're going to talk about Purple Team, things like that, but let's start with some basic marketing first. Tell me a little bit about the company, and then we can get into some tech.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Scythe. We are a platform for performing adversary emulation and Purple Team exercises. It's a modular platform, kind of like an enterprise-grade command and control framework that allows you to build anything you want to build that any red teamer or threat actor can do in an environment. We build synthetic malware for Windows, Linux, and Mac. And what I like most about it is that it's not only about technology and not only about security controls, but also about people and process. That's kind of what I've spent a lot of my time on, is with people and training people. Hopefully all the listeners here know that there is no silver bullet, right? There is no technology you just buy, plug in, and works, unfortunately. But essentially what you can do with Scythe is you can train your people, make sure that they follow the process and that they can detect and respond to attacks before they're impacted, right? Before that the attacker gets away with what they need. It's getting quicker and quicker, but I think we still have a lead, especially when the attackers are now in your house. You should be able to see them and hopefully get rid of them before they impact your business.
Well, let's do a little vocabulary first before we kind of get started. Take us through kind of the red, blue, purple kind of taxonomy, because some people may be completely unfamiliar. I know everybody knows what a pen test is, but red, blue, purple, a little different nuance on that. Take us through what the philosophy is for each of them.
Yep. So red teaming is a type of offensive security assessment. I've been doing offense for 12, 13 years now. I actually started a large financial as a vulnerability assessment analyst. That means that we used a vulnerability scanning tool. I'm sure you've heard of many of them, the Nessus, the Qualyses, the Rapid7s of the world. And we would scan infrastructure, IP addresses, web apps, etc. It comes back with a list of vulnerabilities. We would then validate those vulnerabilities and hopefully only give the vulnerabilities that really needed to get fixed in a prioritized order to the engineers or operations team, or sometimes even vendors of products that didn't know that these vulnerabilities existed, so that they can fix them. And then once a fix is released or a patch, it gets applied, right? It's probably the first step in anything offensive that you're doing, is identifying vulnerabilities and getting them patched. After that, we evolved, and I went through this evolution at the financial, into penetration testing. That is where a person looks at the vulnerability and builds an exploit for it. An exploit is a way of taking advantage of that vulnerability. So from there, we ended up with actual access to a system. It could have been a web application, an operating system, an application, many different things that you can get access to. And from there, we would report that as, a little higher risk, something that actually worked. We were able to get in. But what happened was that our scope was very limited. Like, pen test these IPs or this range, and that's it. You can't go anywhere else. And what we started seeing in the industry is that attackers weren't just exploiting these vulnerabilities in technology. They were actually going after people and process as well. They were going after staff, right? Doing phishing, which everyone's heard of, right? And that's where we started looking at things from the point of the adversary, which is really the definition of red teaming, is looking at something from the point of an adversary. It goes all the way back to the devil's advocate, and the US military, of course, has a red team. But there we looked at everything more holistically, right? In the entire organization. Don't scope me out. Don't tell me what times I can test or not, because the adversaries are testing at all times and trying to get in at all times. So that's where red teaming came about. Now it's, often used as a catch-all phrase to mean everything in offensive security, from vulnerability scanning to pen testing to vulnerability management to red teaming to adversary emulation, threat emulation, etc. So at the end, what we say is start out asking your client what they need, start calling it a security assessment, and then based on where they are in this maturity model, you offer them the services they need, right? Because a red team engagement for an organization that barely does vulnerability management or patches is not really going to be the most high value assessment. And you want to provide value, right? This is why we're here, why we do information security. On the other side, the blue team, also a catch-all phrase for all the defenders in an organization. So some organizations have dedicated security operations center analysts, some have threat hunting teams, digital forensics and incident response teams. Others have managed services, a managed security service provider, and managed detection and response, right? Essentially, everyone that does defense is considered the blue team. And I'll go deeper and bring in cyber threat intelligence. If your team has a cyber threat intelligence team, they're blue. And really, anyone in an organization, if I send an email to someone in accounting and they can detect that that's a phishing email and report it and follow the process to let the right people know, and those right people that see that alert come in take care of it, that means everyone in the organization is security minded and essentially the blue team. And then the purple team is, of course, when we mix both of those, right? Everyone remembers their colors from preschool. It's funny, I have a 7-year-old now, but used to ask her when she was, 3 or 4, how do you make purple? And she got kind of annoyed after the 3rd time, but that's essentially it. It's actually mixing the two together. So not only the offensive team coming in with a report saying, look, this is what we did, and working together. No, working in a full knowledge engagement. So where you get some cyber threat intelligence early, let's say Conti ransomware, right? One of the main ones most listeners probably heard of. This is what Conti does, and go through step by step through those procedures that these threat actors do, discuss them from a tabletop perspective. What are the defensive expectations? Oh, I think our endpoint detection and response will catch that, or our proxy will definitely catch 10 gigabytes of data going out, or and tabletop it, see what the expectation is. And then the red team does those actions in the environment while the blue team watches. It's a learning opportunity for the blue team. But then it's not just red teaching blue anymore, right? It's working together. The blue team then shows the red team their process. Where did they see an alert, right? How did they follow the process? Well, we saw this alert in our SIM, and it came from this EDR solution, and it came from this host. And now let's take a look at that host and maybe even bring in some forensics. Oh, look, it pulled down this file. That file was downloaded from here. All right, bring the firewall folks or the proxy folks. How many other people downloaded this file, right? And go through that process so that everyone is on the same page. So it's really about not only technology, but testing, measuring, and improving people, process, and technology. So that's the quick, what is red, blue, and purple mean in InfoSec?
It's a great summary. Now, George, on one end of the spectrum, running these types of things on live production infrastructure would be very realistic, but maybe a little dangerous. And at the other end of the spectrum, running it on simulated infrastructure, way safer, but maybe the connection to reality could be somewhat suspect. Where do you guys sit? How do you bridge that gap at Scythe? How do you deal with that problem?
Yeah, so that was one of the reasons. So before I went to work at Scythe, I was actually a customer, and that was a big gap we had, right? The red team, in that point, and still to this day, if you have a dedicated red team, your budget is mostly used on people and on training, which is great. But what about the tools? Well, they go out and either they're building their own tools, which we will debate that a red teamer probably isn't building enterprise grade tools. Some do, but we found not many red teamers actually know how to code, or they're getting stuff out from the internet. One of the projects that I I'm a co-creator of. It's called the C2 Matrix, the Command and Control Matrix. And it lists 79 different command and control frameworks, most of them free, most of them open source that you can download right now from GitHub. But is that something that you're going to want to run in your production environment? Of course, a production environment is the most realistic, and the answer is no. And that's really one of the main gaps that Scythe is filling, is that if you're going to run this inside of your enterprise, you want something that executes reliably and consistently, that's not going to degrade your system, especially coming from the financial space. You do not want downtime, right? It would affect a lot of things. So that's why our focus is in testing and production. Testing in non-production is great as well, right? It's great for training people, but how often is production exactly the same as that non-production environment, right? And the answer is never, unless it's a web application and you actually have source code to prove that it's the exact same source code. Most of the time, you're going to want to test in production. Most people that have been doing pen testing and vulnerability assessment, all the offensive stuff, know that's where we have to test. That's what the attackers are going after.
You know, related question around people is that when you're working a live incident, you have no idea who's going to be involved in some aspect, perhaps, of the response. Could be someone, you know, in a business unit. It could be the lawyers. You know, all kinds of crazy technical or non-technical things come up. How do you guys handle that in one of these engagements when you hit one of those places where, you know, you need to be phoning home to an expert, you know, somebody running your DNS or something? Or
Yep.
Do they have to be there as part of the engagement, or can you somehow
they don't? And I think most organizations that don't know who's going to get called is because they haven't done these exercises before. And that occurred with us, right? When we started our first red team engagements, you know, 6-7 years ago, they were stealth engagements. We had trusted agents. In the military, they call them the white team or the white cell, right? Which are the people that should know about. But one of the times we went through a country, that country information security officer was not aware this was an exercise and was about to call a regulator because there was a 72-hour breach notification law in that country. And thankfully, we were able to stop it. But you learn these as you go. And hopefully, most organizations have a playbook of everyone that will be involved. But I'd be lying if I told you we don't find these when we go do these assessments for other organizations. Sometimes we get these alerts or a phone call that someone received an email with this alert and they want to know what's going on because they weren't part of the team that knew about it. So it definitely happens, and that's why the planning phase is a really big phase of anything offensive, right? When you're doing a pen test, a red team engagement, a purple team engagement, an adversary emulation, people underestimate how much planning goes into this. You think that we're just behind a console creating payloads and sending them through phishing emails. No, there's a lot of planning that goes into this, and that's one of the reasons we've written a number of different frameworks around this. The public one that anyone can get is the Purple Team Exercise Framework. It has a table of roles and responsibilities from everyone to, you know, seniors all the way to attendees to spectators that may benefit from watching the engagement.
George, what do you say to organizations that maybe are a little smaller that say, yeah, sure, if you're DISA, then, you know, go ahead and do the purple team, but we're a community bank, or we're a small team or something? What's generally your advice there?
Yeah, so my advice has changed significantly in the last year once I came over to Scythe and got to speak to a lot of other organizations, right? Because at SANS, we're teaching people that can afford that type of training. And then within the FSI SAC, or the Financial Services Information Sharing, we're talking to large organizations as well. So I did think that it was about size, and I don't anymore. I think it all has to do with the maturity level of that organization. We have clients that are 50 members, 50 staff total, not even security. They have 1 or 2 security people, but they're at the point where they can detect and respond to pretty sophisticated types of attack, which is fantastic. But 50-person company is generally not someone you would call an enterprise. At the same time, we've done some work with organizations that you would hope had better detection and response, and after running a POV, they quickly realize that they have zero visibility, which is bad, right? We don't want to sell it to someone that's going to have zero visibility, because what are they going to do from there? They're just going to say, okay, thanks for proving the point that we're going to get compromised, but what do we do now, right? So some organizations use us as their vetting EDR products before they purchase, and then once they do purchase, they have to tune them, right? Because any of these products do amazingly well in a lab environment, but then once you plug them into production, you realize that if you turn everything on, you're going to break business processes. You have to tune them. You have to know, why is PowerShell being used by this, and is it a real business process? Let's allow it. That's fine. Alert on everything else, but not on that, because we know it's good. So that entire process needs to be implemented by most organizations, and not all of them are there, right? Now, a lot of the ones that we see getting hit don't have patch management, don't have vulnerability management, right? They're just not ready, and it doesn't matter the size. So that's an observation I've made recently on this.
You know, it's funny, you're sort of in the perfect position to comment on offense versus defense. Like, there's a lot of debate around kind of who's winning. You know, it seems like the offense has been doing pretty well lately, and that defenders have been challenged. But what's your observation, having been doing this for a long time? Do you see the offensive campaigns becoming so sophisticated and so good that maybe it's just increasingly more difficult to stop them? Or do you see the reverse, with like thousands of commercial vendors out there, that maybe there's a lot better tools there? What's your observation on that arms race?
Yeah, so when looking at it from an internal organization that has a red team and a blue team, you're both either winning or you're both losing. There is no more red versus blue internally, right? At least we hope there isn't. That's something I teach in my SANS, my red team exercise and adversary emulation classes. It's not about winning, it's about working together. We're sparring partners. You don't knock out your sparring partner. When it comes time for that title bout, you are both on the same corner, and you either win together or you lose together. It's no longer red versus blue. Now, from the offensive security or offensive tooling perspective compared to the defensive tools, it's always been a cat and mouse game. As one gets better, the other one has to get better. As the other one gets better, and back and forth, right? And that is a way that we look at internal teams operating together, but also in the industry. There's organizations, like I mentioned, that are very sophisticated, that will detect and respond to a sophisticated attack quickly, while at the same time, you have organizations that won't even know that they were compromised until everyone gets that ransom note on screen saying that they owe a couple $1 million, right? So from a purely tool perspective, right, I think it's pretty evenly matched. Like, you can take an EDR and customize it. You can take an offensive tool and customize it, and you'll be pretty even. The question is, are organizations at that same level? And you know, we talk about adversaries and attackers and that whole advanced persistent threat term, right? They only need to be as advanced or as sophisticated to get past your controls. So something that we see might not necessarily be the most sophisticated, but it worked against that company because they just weren't there. So it's hard to measure. Of course, we would love everyone to get up and be at the same level and be able to detect these real attacks and respond to them before they cause any impact.
Well, let's have you make a prediction here. I mean, one definition of, say, the goal of cybersecurity would be for that gap between offense and defense to close in practice to the point where it's close enough that we can kind of sort of live with the risk. I think we all agree the gap's way too big now, too many attacks going. Do you see the gap closing? Do you think we ever get to the point where cybersecurity is somewhat passe and it's just something we do and don't worry? Or do you think that the gap maybe is widening and it's getting, in some sense, worse? What's your thought?
I'm a very positive person, and you know that, and I think most people know that. So I'm definitely going to predict that it will get better. I think organizations that have not invested and are just now starting to invest are skipping a lot of the legacy stuff that many organizations continue to run that might not work, and go straight into what works today, but also realizing that this will continue to evolve. And that's why it's not just technology. Whatever product and technology you buy, you need people and process to maintain it, to continue to improve it. As new things come out, you're going to have to detect and respond that. New things come out, detect and respond that. I think nowadays everyone is operating under that assumed breach methodology and philosophy that everyone is going to be hacked, right? We saw the largest security companies get breached, so it'll definitely happen to you. And I think that philosophy will really facilitate the improvement as an industry. And of course, it's still going to cost money, but I think we're going to get better.
Well, that's good to hear. Now, George, for people who have some interest in the platform, what would be the best way? Is the website the right place for people to go to?
Yep, Scythe.io, and just fill out the form there. We also have free workshops every month. So if you want to come and play in a lab environment, we have an Active Directory domain controller, a Windows server, a Linux server, and of course the Scythe platform, where you get to emulate some of the newest threats. The one we're doing next is in September is going to be Conti, and then we have new ones coming out all the time. So even if you've done a workshop before, you have a couple hours to come play in an environment that you can completely mess up and not affect anyone else, but hopefully also learn. And again, it's a lot about the people. I really believe in training and bringing more people into this space. So definitely come check us out, Scythe.io.
Well, George, it's great to see you. Keep up the great work at Scythe. Keep up the teaching at SANS. We all love your courses so much. And on behalf of my team at Tag Cyber and all people watching, I want to thank you for spending some time today.
Thank you, and thank you all for listening. And hopefully you got a little bit out of this, and we'll see you around the virtual world.
That's wonderful to hear. And for everyone else watching, we'll see you next time.